Imagine a kingdom nestled at the foot of the snowy Sierra Nevada mountains. This was the Emirate of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain. Its rulers were the Nasrids, a dynasty that created one of the most beautiful palaces in the world, the Alhambra. For over 2.5 centuries, this family held onto their sliver of land, a vibrant hub of art, science, and culture. They were poets, builders, and warriors, ruling a kingdom that was a constant source of fascination and frustration for its powerful Christian neighbors to the north. Their story is one of survival, of breathtaking beauty mixed with brutal politics, a final, glittering chapter of Muslim Spain, or Al-Andalus. But life in Granada was far from a fairy tale. The Nasrid kingdom was surrounded. The Christian kingdoms of Castile and Aragon were always watching, always waiting for a moment of weakness. They demanded heavy tributes, huge payments of gold, just to leave Granada in peace. This constant external pressure made the kingdom vulnerable, like a precious vase on a wobbly table. The Nasrids had to be clever diplomats and fierce fighters just to survive another year. This precarious existence shaped every decision made within the palace walls, turning neighbors into rivals and allies, into potential threats at a moment's notice. Inside the magnificent Alhambra, things were even more complicated. The court was a snake pit of ambition and betrayal. Different families and factions were always plotting, trying to place their own preferred candidate on the throne. The Nasrids themselves were a large, sprawling family, and cousins, uncles and brothers often saw each other not as kin, but as rivals for the ultimate prize, the Sultanate. This internal strife was perhaps an even greater threat than the Christian armies at the gates. A sultan could be celebrated one day and imprisoned or even murdered the next, often by his own relatives. It is into this dazzling but dangerous world that our two sultans, Muhammad VIII and Muhammad IX, were born. Their lives tell the dramatic story of Granada's struggle in the 15th century. They were not just rulers, they were pawns and players in a deadly game of thrones. Their reigns were marked by civil war, coups, and constant battles for survival. Understanding their story is to understand the forces that were tearing the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia apart from the inside, long before its final fall. They represent the internal decay that made the kingdom's eventual conquest almost inevitable. Our story begins with a boy on a throne. Muhammad VIII became sultan in 1417 when he was just a child. Because he was so young, the real power was held by his vizier, a powerful court official from the Abencerrajis family. This powerful, noble family essentially ran the kingdom for him, making all the important decisions about war and diplomacy. For a time, this arrangement brought a bit of stability. The vizier was a capable leader who managed to keep the peace with the neighboring Christian kingdom of Castile. The young sultan lived a life of luxury within the Alhambra, learning the ways of the court, but holding very little actual authority himself. But as Muhammad VIII grew into a young man, he started to want real power. He was the sultan, after all. He grew tired of being a puppet for his vizier and the influential Abencerrajis clan. He started to listen to whispers from other rival families at court who promised to support him if he took control. This was a dangerous game. By turning against the very people who had protected him, he was making powerful enemies. In 1419, the political situation exploded. A rival faction, the Banagas, helped him overthrow and execute his vizier, a move that he thought would secure his position as the true ruler of Granada. This act of defiance backfired terribly. By killing his powerful vizier, Muhammad VIII had alienated the Abencerrajis family, one of the most powerful clans in the kingdom. They were furious and immediately began plotting their revenge. They decided to support another Nasrid prince, a man who would become Muhammad IX. This rival claimant started a civil war, gathering supporters and challenging the young sultan's authority. The kingdom, already under pressure from outside, was now fighting against itself. The dream of a strong, independent sultan was quickly turning into a nightmare of internal conflict and bloodshed. The result was chaos. After a decade of on-and-off civil war, Muhammad VIII was finally defeated in 1427. He was captured and thrown into a prison, his short and troubled reign over for now. He would briefly return to power for a few months a couple of years later, but his fate was sealed. His story is a classic tale of a young ruler who tried to assert his power too quickly and paid the ultimate price. He underestimated the powerful families that controlled the court, and in doing so, he plunged his kingdom into a destructive civil war that only made it weaker and more vulnerable to its enemies. The man who replaced the boy sultan was a very different character. Muhammad IX, known as Al-Aysar, or the left-handed, was a seasoned and ruthless political survivor. He was older, more experienced, and understood the brutal nature of Granadan politics far better than his young predecessor. He came to power not by birthright alone, but through conspiracy and civil war, backed by the vengeful Ibn Siraj's clan. His primary goal was not just to rule, but to hold on to the throne at any cost. This made him a formidable, but also a very harsh leader in an age that demanded nothing less for survival. Muhammad IX's time as Sultan was anything but stable. In fact, he holds a strange record. He was Sultan on 4 separate occasions. He would be overthrown by a rival, forced into exile in North Africa, and then plot his return. This cycle of being deposed and then fighting his way back to power defined his long and chaotic career. He was incredibly resilient, forming new alliances and waiting for his rivals to make a mistake. Each time he returned, he was more determined and often more brutal, purging the court of anyone he suspected of disloyalty. His reign was a constant whirlwind of political maneuvering. One of his most significant actions was his shifting policy towards the Kingdom of Castile. At times he tried to fight back against Christian encroachment, launching raids and refusing to pay the heavy tribute. He wanted to project an image of strength and restore Granada's pride. However, he also knew when to negotiate. When his kingdom was weakened by internal fighting, he would agree to a truce and resume the gold payments to buy precious time. This constant switching between aggression and diplomacy shows what a pragmatic leader he was, willing to do whatever it took to keep his kingdom afloat for another day. Ultimately, Muhammad IX's greatest challenge was the one he could never fully defeat: the internal divisions within Granada. His entire political life was spent fighting other Nasrids who wanted the throne. He was a product of the factionalism that was tearing the kingdom apart, and he also contributed to it. His final act was a tragic one. Before his death in 1453, he ordered the execution of his old rival, Muhammad VIII, and his sons to ensure they could never challenge his chosen successor. This brutal decision highlights the desperate and violent nature of his long struggle for power. The reigns of Muhammad VIII and Muhammad IX were a critical turning point for the Emirate of Granada. Their constant power struggles created deep and lasting wounds. Every time a sultan was overthrown, it wasn't just one man who fell, but an entire network of families and supporters. This led to a cycle of revenge and instability that paralyzed the kingdom. While the sultans were busy fighting each other for control of the Alhambra, the Christian kingdoms to the north were growing more unified and powerful. The internal chaos in Granada was a golden opportunity for their enemies, who watched and waited as the Nasrids weakened themselves. This period of civil war directly shaped the final years of Muslim rule in Spain. The kingdom became fractured and exhausted. Resources that should have been used to strengthen the borders and defend against Castile were instead wasted on internal conflicts. The authority of the Sultan was permanently damaged. No ruler could command the full loyalty of his subjects, as there was always another claimant waiting in the wings, often with support from Castile itself. The Christian kings became experts at playing the Granadan factions against each other, supporting one Nasrid prince against another to keep the emirate in a state of perpetual weakness. So why do the stories of these two long-dead sultans matter today? They serve as a powerful lesson in leadership and politics. They show us how internal division can be more destructive than any external threat. The story of Muhammad VIII is a cautionary tale about ambition without power, while Muhammad IX's life shows the terrible costs of holding on to power in a fractured state. Their struggle is a dramatic example of how personal rivalries and political infighting can bring down even the most dazzling of civilizations. The beautiful art and architecture of the Alhambra were created against a backdrop of constant bloody intrigue. In the end, their legacy is a tragic one. They presided over a period where Granada's fate was sealed, not by a single decisive battle, but by a slow and painful decay from within. When the final war against Granada began a few decades later, the kingdom was too divided to mount an effective defense. The seeds of its destruction were sown during the turbulent reigns of the boy Sultan and the left-handed survivor. Their story reminds us that the foundations of a society must be strong, because even the most beautiful palace will eventually crumble if its inhabitants are determined to tear it down.